Welcome to FIAR 432 Video Production Module 2, Kinds of Shots, Kinds of Motion. Like any language, video and film have certain basic elements that you use as building blocks. The most basic in film and video are the kinds of shots. The kinds of shots really represent an analog to what nouns are to a language. The kinds of motion would represent the kinds of verbs, or the analog to verbs. We're going to now look into the 6 major kinds of shots and the 3 major kinds of motion in film and video. Before you can understand the kinds of shots, you have to understand that film and video involve a kind of window to the world. That window is basically formed through a kind of rectangle. In the case of traditional video, that rectangle is a 3x4 rectangle, which you can see here, and you can see that vertically it is 3, horizontally it is 4 in its content. Okay, so basically the window of traditional television, traditional electronic television that Philo T. Farnsworth developed, and which we're basically going to be leaving as the primary format of video in February 17th, 2009, basically is the 3x4 ratio rectangle is the window that video uses and has used. We will be looking at the new format, but right now you should understand what 3x4 ratio is. Another term they use is aspect ratio. When you buy a television, you don't buy a 3x4 ratio. You use the diagonal, which is the hypotenuse of the triangle, for those of you who are mathematically inclined. So a 25-inch screen would be measured by the diagonal of the screen from corner to corner, and not by the height and the width. But basically the 3x4 ratio is the classic standard definition format or aspect ratio of television. The new format of television that will be the standard operating procedure after February 17th, 2009 is the 9:16 ratio. And basically that represents a 9 unit vertical and a 16 unit horizontal. So all composition in television will now be going to this format. It is more horizontally oriented. It actually is interestingly proportionate to the 3x4. If you square 3x4, that would be 3 times 3 and 4 times 4, you get 9:16. So really the 9:16 ratio window for video and for film and for computers as well is basically the square of the old standard definition. 9:16 is basically the 3x4 ratio squared in the horizontal and vertical. Composition in both formats, whether it's in this kind of format, which is the 3x4 aspect ratio, or the 9:16 ratio, is very similar. There's not that big a difference, but it does represent a major move to making video look more like movies and film. That's been one of the major moves that has taken place. The 9:16 high definition format looks a lot more like movies. It has a more of a movie feel, that larger, wide horizon, and it is considered to be a lot more attractive. And we're going to be looking at it in much more depth as we go along. This is the first page of handout number 1, and it shows the 6 classic kinds of shots, which I say are analogous to nouns in written language. These are the basic objects that are used to communicate meaning in the visual medium of film and video. And we're going to look at each. I want you to know what the initials are of them, and I want you to know what they are spelled out as, and I also want you to understand the implications of each. All of this is outlined on your handout number 1, and we're going to look at it in depth now. The first kind of shot we will talk about is the close-up. Now, it should be noted here, the close-up is really, in many respects, the most important shot that you will deal with in the 6 classic kinds of shots. I want you to realize that the close-up is basically a head and shoulders shot. Just like you see me here, this is the classic head and shoulders shot. This is a classic close-up. I want you to also observe the closeness of the head to the top of the frame. Make sure that when you do close-ups that you try to keep the head close to the top of the frame. The reason being is that if somebody's lower, it lowers their value. It makes them look like they're in some way inferior. You may want to do that intentionally if you want to make somebody look bad, and in this political season we're in right now, that's one way to make somebody look bad. But basically, if you want to make them look good, you put them with their head very close to the top of the frame. That basically says that they are in charge, that they own that frame, and that they are the main focus of the picture. I also want to remind you that I do want you to know the initials of the close-up, which is CU. It's important that you understand that if you read the literature, they will often refer to these various kinds of shots in their initials, and the CU is the close-up. And as I mentioned to you, it is the most important. Whatever video production you do, you better have a close-up shot in there. It is the up-close and personal shot that everybody looks forward to in their life. When you have a relationship with a friend or somebody you like, you want to get up close and personal. You want to be able to get close enough to where you can see their head and shoulders. And the close-up shot is really the pay dirt shot of all shots. The next shot we'll look at is the medium shot, or MS, its initial. The medium shot represents the head, shoulders, and hands shots. And it's important, the hands are the key factor in there. In the close-up shot, I basically showed you the head and shoulders. As soon as hands enter into the shot, it's a medium shot. The hands are the crucial thing. Now, the importance of the hands in this is that it is like putting your cards on the table. It is considered to be the professional shot. If you engage in video conferencing and other protocols where you're engaged in professional communications, you should kind of focus in the area of medium shots primarily. People want to see your hands. They want to see that you're not dealing from below the deck, from the bottom of the deck, or concealing something under the table. And so by putting your hands above the table and engaging in the medium shot with head, shoulders, and hands, you are basically indicating that you have nothing to hide. And that's why this is referred to as the professional shot. So remember that if you're engaged in professional communications, don't start out with a close-up unless you're doing something like I'm doing, where you have an instructor-student relationship. That's one thing, because that's an authority kind of relationship. But basically in a professional situation, everybody has their hands on the table, everybody has equal view of who's controlling what, and therefore the medium shot is your professional shot. The next kind of shot we're going to look at is the long shot, and it is also known as the LS, the long shot. The key thing to remember about the long shot is that it is basically a head-to-toe shot, and it's very important when you're dealing with head-to-toe that you actually put the feet on the bottom of the frame, and generally the head will be on the top of the frame. In this shot here with the golfer, there's a little bit of room left in the headroom area because the golf club is going to swing a little bit above the head. But normally it would be shown with the head at the top of the frame, just like I mentioned in the other shot. The long shot I refer to as the creature shot. It basically tells you what kind of a creature that you're dealing with in a particular story. In this case, it's a golfer out in a beautiful environment playing golf, but it's the golfer you're focusing on here, and that's what the long shot does. A shot that might be a little bit more kind of humorous would be this shot, which is me standing in front of the education building in my protective suit, preparing to deal with the problems of the mold and recovery in our building since we've been in a recovery mode. Here you see the head and shoulder shot. My head is pretty much close to the top of the frame, my feet on the bottom. This is a basic long shot. Okay. The next kind of shot we're going to focus on is the extreme long shot. The extreme long shot takes the creature and really minimizes the creature, and it emphasizes the habitat. That's why I call this the habitat shot. Unlike the long shot which focused on the creature, now we're focusing on the creature in its habitat. And to show you a funny example of what this is like, here's me standing in my habitat on our north campus after one of our 1-inch rains left our habitat flooded. This is something that we have to deal with, and it's something that it shows you basically the creature in its habitat, in this case a flooded habitat. On the other shot, in the long shot, you saw me in the moldy recovery habitat. And this seems to be a reality of our day and time. But the extreme long shot puts the creature into a habitat. And so don't forget also, I want you to know that it is known by its initials, ELS, the extreme long shot. And again, it emphasizes the creature in a habitat. You will also notice in things like sports events and so forth that here we have the man on the moon, but in sports events it's important because usually they have to conquer a large habitat. In football it would be the football field or the soccer field. In any of those situations, those sports arenas would be the habitat. The next kind of shot that we're going to talk about is the extreme close-up shot, or ECU. Again, I want you to remember the initials of these. The ECU, or extreme close-up shot, is used to show extreme emotion. In this case, this woman could have just found out she got a raise. In this shot of me, I might have just won the lottery. So you use the eyes to show this. An extreme close-up could be other things. I'm focusing here with all these shots on human faces and aspects like shoulders and hands and legs, head to toe, because 90% or more of what you will shoot will be human shots. And so your shots with faces and hands and feet and heads and toes are really important to understanding the language, because really the face is the most communicative part of the human form. Of all of the objects in the experience of being a human being, the face is probably the most communicative. You can express hundreds of thousands of emotions just between the relationship of the eyes, the mouth, the certain angles of eyebrows or whatever. All of these things are crucial to understanding communication of the face, and of course the face as it communicates through video and film. The last of the kinds of shots we'll discuss today is the establishment shot, or ES. Now don't confuse that with extreme long shot, ELS. A lot of my students will make mistakes with that. The establishment shot usually involves a sign, like we see here. The City Hall sign is an example that you'll see. And what it does is it shows the location of the story. Again, all of these kinds of shots are an attempt to tell stories, and the stories require locations. Now you might say, well, isn't that habitat shot that we looked at, which was the extreme long shot, the location shot? Well, sometimes that can happen. In this shot here, you can see one of the places we broadcast from, this program and others, is at the World Trade Center in New Orleans, which was, by the way, was the first World Trade Center before the one in New York, which unfortunately suffered the fate that it did. The World Trade Center shot here, this is wide enough that it could be considered to be an extreme long shot and an establishment shot. But really, I want you to focus on the idea of a sign. It could be, for instance, a street sign could be a location shot, and it could be a fairly close shot of the street sign. It could be the bow of a ship where it says the SS Bounty or the SS Titanic. So an establishment shot tells you the location of where you are, but it doesn't necessarily show you the habitat. Just as we said that there were 6 kinds of shots and that these represented the nouns, so to speak, of film and video language, the verbs would be represented by the 3 kinds of motion. There are basically 3 kinds of motion. You have very obvious titles: primary motion, secondary motion, and tertiary motion. Tertiary is just a fancy academic way of saying third, the third kind of motion. And all of the motion that you experience in film and video can be broken down to these kinds of motion. They are basic and very important. And we're going to look at the first one now. The first kind of motion we'll look at here is primary motion. In primary motion, the camera is still, the subject moves. The subject moves, the camera is still. And this is the most basic way to use a camera. And in the early days when cameras were huge, when film cameras were huge, they primarily focused on primary motion because it wasn't easy to move a camera. And the same with video. The first video cameras were too big to move around, and so really primary motion was the way in which you would use the camera. Secondary motion is really where cinema and film came into their own. The camera moves, the subject is still. Now, in advanced situations, you can have combinations of motion, but in its most basic form, the camera moves and the subject is still. Okay, this is important to understand. The camera moving is the key factor in there, and that's important because a number of things can be done by making a camera move that are a lot easier to handle than when you have to make subjects move. A classic example of this is it's a lot harder for me to make a film set move if I wanted to indicate an earthquake. The easiest way to do it would be to shake the camera. So I shake the camera and then I look scared, and people would know, oh, it's an earthquake, it's an earthquake. No, it's not an earthquake, I'm just shaking the camera. But the audience can't tell the difference whether the camera is shaking or not. There are many other aspects to this besides that in the process of showing the camera moving, and we're going to talk about them more. Because film and video are able to be recorded on either film or videotape or on digital format, DVD or whatever, because they can be recorded this way, they can be changed. You can do all kinds of things with film and video by being able to change the sequence of things, putting one thing after another that wouldn't normally occur in that particular way, and by so doing you can create all kinds of magic. And so tertiary motion is really the magical aspect of film and video. It is really where you can do some very magical things. Basically, the other important factor to understand is that our brains tend to put things together in sequences. When you see, for instance, a shooter in a gunfight, you see the person shoot the gun, and then the scene cuts, and the other person comes on, and they are blown away. Basically, your brain says that the guy who shot the gun in a quick draw or whatever has shot the other person, and that the other person has been shot and is either going to die or be wounded. Actually, no one has actually been shot. It is the illusion of shooting, the illusion of the emotion of shooting, which has been captured on the film or video. And with these little cartoon figures here, I'm simulating this. If you can take a look at this, I'll show you a simulation with these little GIFs. First you have a shooter, then a person who's shot at, and then the person who gets shot falls down and plays dead. Because of the editing of that sequence, it looks like somebody's actually been shot, but no one has really been shot. This is really important for all of film and video. It is where you can really do some wonderful things and create some wonderful effects. So tertiary motion is the last of the kinds of motion, or the verbs that we talked about in the language of film and video. The most extreme form of tertiary motion in film and video is animation. It is exclusively the illusion of motion through editing. So we're going to talk about that in future episodes. Following with our analogy of language, there are certain do's and don'ts, like using language well, and your handout should include this. In your composition, whether it's composition of the shot or composition in motion, you want to make sure, if I'm showing up here, that the face is looking into the larger area of the frame. We see it over here as well. The face is kind of an arrow, and you want to make sure that the face looks into the frame. What you don't want to do is compose the person, again, with too much headroom, as I show here. If you look on the second one on the left-hand side. The other one is to have somebody partially off frame or really close to the frame, looking out away from the large area. That's a no-no. The other don'ts that you want to avoid are composing people too far apart. This is not good, because what happens is that it makes their heads a lot smaller, and because of that you have fewer pixels. It's much less interesting. This would be a nice shot to begin with, but you'd want to have them closer as you moved along. The other don't in composition is what you call the Dutch tilt. The Dutch tilt, where you tilt the camera. You do not want to be doing Dutch tilts. Dutch tilts basically make somebody look like they're off balance or crazy. The last thing that I want you to know in Module 2 has again to do with composition, whether you're dealing with kinds of shots or kinds of motion. It's called the 180-degree rule. Basically, if you have two subjects that you're focusing on, in this case on the left-hand side I have cowboys, on the right-hand side I have Indians. If you start off with the cowboys going from left to right, you should always have the Indians coming from right to left. And that's true whether it be a close-up shot, a medium shot, or a long shot. And the same for our Indians on the other side of the frame. You want them facing each other in the frames, looking into the large area. This is referred to as the 180-degree rule. That has to do with the fact that the frame that you look at is basically, if you put an arc into the frame, you have 90 degrees when you get up to the middle, and then another 90 degrees when you get down. That's 180 degrees. Basically, the 180-degree rule has to do with keeping subjects in their place. Cowboys, if they start on this side, stay on this side. Indians stay on their side throughout the entire framing of a particular sequence in a story. You can change it in another chapter or another portion of the story, but once you start a direction, you must keep it. And that's a basic rule of film composition, whether it be kinds of shots or kinds of motion. As with Module 1, I want you to follow the same instructions. Click on Reply, answer the questions provided, click Send, and you're done. Respond to each email the same way. Wait for further instructions. This is the end of Module 2, Kinds of Shots, Kind of Motion.